Welcome to the Social Workers radio talk show on WCDB Albany 90.9 FM with co-host Dr. Eric Hardiman and Alyssa Lotmore. Here at the Social Workers, we address issues important to our communities with social work students, alumni, and community partners as our guests.
As part of the University at Albany School of Social Welfare, we hope to take social work beyond the classroom and agency settings and directly to the public, because the public is the client. Catch us on air, online, and anytime.
You are listening to WCDB Albany. My name is Eric. I'm here with Alyssa Lotmore. Welcome back to the Social Workers, Alyssa.
Hey, Eric. It's always great to be back. And it's the end of the semester, which means we usually have students on, which is the case today.
It is the case today. And, you know, it's interesting. We often have graduate students, but today we have an undergraduate student. We have with us JT Stone. JT grew up in Ithaca, New York, and is a second semester freshman here at the University at Albany. He is majoring in journalism and minoring in communications and leadership. So I don't know, Alyssa, we'll talk to JT in a minute, but I'm really excited about this episode. You know, when young folks get involved with broadcast and journalism and podcasting and using their own voice to make a difference over the air, I think it's tremendously exciting.
It is exciting. And what's even more like fabulous about the student is that he listens to the Social Workers radio talk show. I met JT at one of the UAlbany accepted student open houses, and I went to introduce myself and he already knew who I was. So I'm really glad that A, that people actually listen to our show, and this is proof, and B, that there is a student who is only a freshman who's already been creating podcasts and is interested in journalism and interested in using voice to get messages out and to be able to talk about things like mental health and advocate. So this is definitely an exciting episode.
Yeah, and it's nice, like and it's nice that we have listeners for sure. And it's great when those listeners connect with our show and then we get to interview them. But it's also great to interview folks sort of outside of the typical social work realm, if you will. So our show is obviously called The Social Workers, and part of our mission here on The Social Workers is to talk about social work and related issues. But we often tend to do that with folks that are social workers, or learning to be social workers, or graduate students in social work and social welfare. And so today, you know, JT Stone is going to join us, and he's not a social worker and not training to be a social worker, but is in journalism instead. And so I really like that. I think, you know, we're sort of branching out with our interviews here a bit, and it's nice to get a different perspective on some of the same issues that social workers deal with.
And it's also great to show, because again, I met JT at the accepted student open house at UAlbany, and I talked to a lot of students that day, and so many stopped by the table saying that they had an interest in advocacy and raising awareness about social justice issues and about so many different topics that are tied to social work, but they didn't want to be social workers. They were in another major. But it just goes to show how social work is involved in so many different areas, even if it's not specifically getting your BSW degree in the undergrad.
Well, I think part of that, you know, and we'll get to the episode here in a second, but part of that maybe relates to the pandemic and the last few years, and the fact that, you know, certainly awareness around mental health is increasing, awareness around the need for social justice and equity. And, you know, I think things are changing in our society, as we've talked about a lot on this show. And so folks that maybe didn't see themselves as adjacent to social work or interested in social work, maybe didn't even know about social work, are starting to realize that social justice is something that matters to them. And, you know, issues like mental health and child welfare and just well-being in general start to appeal to a larger audience. And so that's one of the great things. You know, I worry sometimes that with our show being called The Social Workers, that folks will think it's just about social work, but it's really about much more than that. And I think our interview with JT will highlight that. So once again, we have JT Stone with us. he, as I said, grew up in Ithaca, but is now here in Albany as a journalism major. So JT, welcome to the Social Workers.
Hi guys, thank you again so much for having me. I'm very excited to get my voice on the air now.
We're excited to have you.
Yeah, there we go. In unison too.
I know. So JT, just briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to UAlbany as a journalism student.
Definitely. I think there's so many aspects of my journey. I know that I've always identified as a journalist. It's just kind of my way of being in this world. I'm always asking questions, trying to learn new things, meet new people, become a better and more well-rounded human being. And, it's funny, whenever people ask me, what got you interested in journalism? My short answer is always Katy Perry. And let me explain. When I was a freshman at Ithaca High School, I was the gossip kid. I was strongly into and still sort of do follow pop culture. Mostly, in terms of celebrity news, movie news. And so I was the type of student that would be like, did you hear what happened with Katy Perry, Taylor Swift, so-and-so? So that was me. And I grew a bit of a following of people that were genuinely interested in the news I had to share. And I also checked my email on an unhealthy basis, I would argue. And so those two factors kind of came together, and I decided to launch my own email newsletter that I entitled Fun Fact of the Day. So I was just like a freshman in high school, but I was already sort of a journalist. I was sort of I cited my sources, which were, like kind of the celebrity news outlets. So it wasn't like original reporting by any means, but it was kind of getting my feet wet in journalism and actually writing about current events and sharing that with an audience. And that evolved to real journalism opportunities. I guess one of my friends at the time forwarded one of my fun fact emails to the managing editor of the Ithaca Voice, one of our online local news publications. And after the editor read my piece, we made the connection, and I actually started as a contributing writer for them, actually getting articles published, interviews conducted. And that was kind of my first experience that empowered me as a professional journalist. And I was only, a high schooler. And so that experience, along with my radio experience, really helped shape me into the person I think I am, not only, as someone who's passionate about hearing people's stories, but, as I said, a journalist. And that's really what brought me here to UA.
And so it's really fascinating story so far, JT. Partially, and I said this to you before we started the interview, but, it resonates with me just because I also started college radio. It's not exactly the same as your situation, but I started college radio when I was in high school, more through a music connection, but through that idea of being on the air and connecting with an audience and talking to people and sharing music. And so I think there's something about high school as a time when some folks can really find their voice and really, sort of discover how to connect that voice to an audience. And so your story, demonstrates that, I think, really nicely. So tell us about how did you get involved with the radio station, and what was the radio station you were involved with, and tell us about that.
Yeah. So starting my junior year of high school, I launched my very own radio show on WRFI Community Radio, which is Ithaca's community radio station. It's funny because I had wanted to be on the radio ever since middle school. I very vividly remember my dad driving me to school, and then subsequently him driving me to my then summer job as a camp counselor. And we had on our local pop hit radio station, Z95.5. And I very vividly remember listening to one of my favorite DJs, Tori V, just jamming out to tunes, my favorite tunes, and having a great time. And that was kind of my first instance where I was like, oh my gosh, this exists. This is something that like I could maybe do. And actually, the first thing I did is I applied to work at kind of that top radio station. But because I was so young, I don't think I was quite qualified. But then a couple years later, I was at one of our festivals, the Ithaca Festival, in downtown Ithaca, where a lot of community organizations have their own booth to get new volunteers, new members. And I saw that WRFI had a booth. And I had not heard of them before, but I knew that they were a radio station. And so I decided to start talking to some of the people. And they said, yeah, we'd love to have you as a volunteer. And so that connection was sort of my way into radio. I ended up talking with the director and some of the other volunteers there, and they were looking for students, unlike some of the other stations. They actually had a youth-centered program that I was able to join. Before I joined, every Wednesday, they had their own program called the Youth Radio Project, where they would invite high school DJs to come in and basically play any songs that they wanted, as long as they were approved, by management. The other thing too is the building that the station was located in was shared by one of our charter schools, New Roots Charter School. So there were already a ton of high schoolers kind of flowing in and out of the station.
Yeah.
And so there was already a pretty cool group of students that I got to work with. But most of them did DJing, like kind of the traditional music playing, DJ hosting. But I wanted to do more of a talk radio where I actually got to interview people, tell stories. And thankfully, my show that I named Youth Voices was able to air as part of the Youth Radio Project. So when my show wasn't airing, the traditional youth DJs were on.
Oh, I love the whole background of that. I think a lot of people, when they're interested in something as a kid, it kind of sticks. I had a podcast or a little radio show that I did, and this was back in the late 80s, but I had my cassette tape, and I still have the cassette tapes where I would record my own show and everything like that. So I think sometimes as a kid, when you're interested in things like radio, it does stick. So I love your story. So how did you end up listening to The Social Workers? I'm kind of curious. How did you find our show?
I found your show partially because I'm like, is anyone else a podcaster? I mean, there must be.
Yeah.
I've always been, whenever I'm in a new environment, especially, geographically, I feel that it's part of my obligation as a citizen to feel connected to my community, which includes a big part of that for me is reading local news and learning kind of who are the prominent people that I should follow, like on Twitter, just in general. And so I started listening. So I started just doing kind of a basic Google search of UAlbany radio shows and podcasts, seeing is anyone else doing something similar to what I would like to start here at UAlbany with my own new talk show. And so that's kind of how I stumbled across the Social Workers podcast. And I love what you guys are doing, because it's kind of my vision too, is giving a voice and a platform to people that aren't heard as much,
Right.
kind of breaking down stigmas or misconceptions and stigmas even about kind of a focused topic. I know for me, as you guys mentioned earlier, I focused for some of my episodes on the issues of mental illness and breaking down stigmas, misconceptions. And I love that you guys are doing that for the field of social work. I know that it's major specific and it relates obviously to a study here at UAlbany, but I just love that aspect of you guys giving voice to young people and really using the medium of podcasting and audio to illuminate that. Because what I found is that, I've been in digital journalism where, I'm transcribing interviews, typing it out. And I got to say, there's something special about audio, about just listening to the authentic telling of a story from a person's heart that you don't get in a lot of other places. And so it's cool to see other people kind of understand and embrace that kind of authentic art.
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of people have talked about, and maybe this is just colloquially, but a lot of people have talked about in a doomsaying way, have been talked about the death of radio, that now we've got the internet and we've got Twitter and Instagram and all these other kind of instant ways to consume media. And so some folks have talked about, is radio still relevant in this day and age? It's a technology that's quite old now. But I agree with you. I think there's something about the audio and something about hearing stories and hearing voices and connecting in a way that is not necessarily visual first. And so certainly there are podcasts that have visual elements where you can watch an interview happening live if you're watching on YouTube or Instagram. But I'm with you that I think there's something there in the audio piece, and I think that's really important. Can you talk about your to pull back or to circle back to something you said a minute ago? What was your sort of interest in mental health, and how did you kind of get that connection going with your show?
Yeah. So I need to be honest, before I produced my 2 mental health episodes, I knew nothing. I knew very, very, very little about anything relating to mental health or mental illness. Before those episodes, I didn't really know what mental illness was.
Mm.
And the reason I decided to embark on hosting and producing those episodes was honestly because it was an issue that I knew students in my community were passionate about. That was my major driving force for all my episodes, starting with the first episode that I moderated and produced about abortion, where I brought someone who was pro-life and pro-choice together for a common ground discussion. Like my show has always been about what issues do students in the Ithaca community care about and are willing to speak openly about. And so that's always been what I kind of, the lens through which I view what topics to cover. And with mental health, even though I have been fortunate enough to never have experienced mental illness or any severe mental health issues, a lot of my close friends have.
Mhm.
And so I viewed it as my obligation as someone with this incredible platform and media in the community. I saw it as my obligation to uplift their stories and educate myself in the process to educate others in the community. And so before even doing any of those interviews, I did research. I did extensive research using sites like the National Alliance for Mental Illness, local nonprofit organizations that address issues of mental health, like the Sophie Fund. So I did like days of research just looking for statistics that really captured the prevalence of mental illness in my community and nationally. What are actual symptoms of, say, bipolar disorder, depression. So I really knew that if I were to tackle this and actually be a competent interviewer, I had to educate myself. And so that was kind of my first process of, what do I need to do before I can really, be in a position where I can do this. And it was actually pretty easy getting students to be on those episodes. Typically when producing my show, not everyone wants to talk about gun rights or abortion,
Right.
so I really wanted to make the show too accessible to all students. It started out as more of a political podcast because my thinking originally was, seeing how as a country we are very divided, it started out as a way to bring students together to have common ground political conversations, to show that, yes, students can be the next leaders of the day. But I realized in the process that, not everyone feels that comfortable talking about politics. And so I made the decision to branch it out to any topics youth in the community were passionate about. And so I did an episode where I interviewed student athletes and self-proclaimed theater nerds about, misconceptions and, their experience with their respective extracurricular activities. So it really was a way to get students talking about anything they wanted to. And
Sure.
going back to the mental health episodes, I learned so much about these conditions. I mean, I had never heard about dermatillomania. I had never heard of that word before. I had never even known of the misconception that some people link depression with laziness. It was such a learning experience for me. And to even hear that some of my close friends that I had known for years were struggling with these issues that I had never heard of. And
Mhm.
so for me, it was such an invaluable experience just as a journalist and audio producer. And then to share that journey, share those voices with the community was honestly one of the best things I feel like I could have done with my time during the pandemic.
Yeah. And what was the response like to your show? So the show is called Youth Voices. So do you have a sense of who your audience was for these episodes that you produced and hosted? And did you get feedback from them? And what was the response like?
Yeah, I'm I'm definitely active on social media. So along with just sharing all of my podcasts, all my radio pieces on my social media, I do get feedback just from community members. I actually remember, for the mental health episodes, not only did all my interviewers greatly appreciate hearing their voice and stories on the air, but hearing from their parents. It was actually funny because after those two episodes about mental health aired, I subsequently got a job working at one of our local elementary schools as a one-to-one aide with a student with autism, which that in itself was also one of the best experiences, professional experiences of my life, to be sure. But I was, getting to know my team, my fellow coworkers, and what do you know? One of my my coworkers happened to be the mother of one of my interviewees. And I'm like, what a
Huh.
small world. And I had never met her before. And I was talking about, hey, my radio episode about mental health just aired. And she was like, yeah, I know. I listened to it with my daughter who you interviewed. And I'm like, oh my God. And so, yeah, like my mom always says it's better to be a big fish in a small pond. And I definitely feel that way in Ithaca, where people are listening. And on top of that, I've also just gotten emails from community members that I've never met before saying, thank you for, being in this position and using your platform to tackle the serious issue. So I've gotten feedback from teachers, from community members, parents, and fellow students, which I think is most valuable.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's people here right now listening who want to find these episodes. Where can they find them?
Yeah, so I have had the enormous privilege of kind of having my foot in the door of two major Ithaca news outlets, WRFI Community Radio and the Ithaca Voice. Because I provided sort of a youth perspective to both outlets, they were both open and willing to basically publish each of my episodes on their website. So along with it airing on the radio, each of my episodes can also be found on wrfi.org and the Ithaca Voice's website, theithacavoice.com. So if you just Google like youth voices, Ithaca Voice or WRFI, you should be able to access each of my 5 episodes.
Great. Great. So if you've just tuned in, we're talking with JT Stone, who is a freshman here at the University of Albany, majoring in journalism, minoring in communication and leadership, and had his own podcast and radio program entitled Youth Voices in Ithaca. So JT, what's your experience been like here in Albany, and particularly at the University of Albany? I know you're new to the UA community, but I would love to hear what it's been like so far.
Yeah, I am new, but and I don't mean this, I don't want to sound like too generic, but it really does feel like a second home already. And I'm very, very thankful for that. At first I will say I did feel a bit homesick, leaving Ithaca because I am so close and still am with my parents, with my family and community. And so, but I have been so lucky here at UAlbany. I'm part of the Living Learning community for community service. And so I really feel like I helped set myself up for success. Being on a floor with other like-minded, compassionate, and passionate people, as it relates to service and just kind of being a good person in this world, I feel. And so, socially, I'm doing great. And even academically, I'm enjoying all my classes. Being a journalism major, I'm also part of the honors college, and I'm really enjoying taking my honors courses and really kind of challenging myself academically, but also balancing my academics and social life. It's funny because one you know, I've had so many new experiences here at college, and one that I think makes me unique is I've been watching Star Wars for my first time. Before the semester, I'd never seen a Star Wars movie. I don't know why, but a lot of my friends grew up on it, and so they viewed it as their obligation to watch Star Wars with me. And so, you know, it's like every night now we've been having a Star Wars movie night with popcorn, with food, where they're answering my questions, and it's been such a heartwarming experience for me. And so like that's just one example of how welcomed I feel. So yeah, I feel I do feel like a great dean at this point.
Well,
I
it
feel like
sounds
this
like,
is going to be a new article coming out, you know, your experience with Star Wars as a college freshman.
Maybe.
yeah. And I would love, you know, it's interesting, JT, just hearing you talk about your experience as a freshman and sort of um, joining the UAlbany community. It'd be really great if some high school students heard this episode of our show and, you know, became interested in journalism and became interested in the University of Albany. And it just strikes me as you're in your first year, finishing up your first year, and you've got at least 3 more years, if not more, in graduate school if you end up taking that path here at Albany. And, you know, it seems like you're on the path towards some really great things and potential leadership in this area. So it'd be really nice to get some younger folks interested too.
Yeah, I fully agree. I'm, you know, as I said, I started in journalism kind of as the gossip kid, and I still do. I mean, some people still call me a walking advertisement for things I'm a part of. So I definitely tell people about cool clubs or programs I'm a part of. And yeah, no, I'll definitely tell them to listen to the awesome Social Workers podcast.
And,
Oh, thank
and
you.
speaking of, I was just going to say, you know, you mentioned clubs, have you thought about getting involved with WCDB? Which is, of course, for listeners, if you're tuning in, it is our campus radio station here at the University of Albany that we're very proud of. It's been going for a long, long time. It's a pillar, I think, of the radio universe here in Albany, New York. And obviously we reach listeners around the globe through the internet because we stream live. But most importantly, it is run by students at the University at Albany and mostly staffed by students and occasional faculty members like myself and staff members like Alyssa, but and some alum in some cases, and we do even have a few community members who are DJs who are really important to our radio family. But there's lots of opportunities to get involved in radio directly through WCDB if you're interested.
Oh, you
Yeah,
put
you know,
him right in the spot.
I know.
You know, it's funny you bring that up because that is exactly what I've been thinking about ever since the semester started. You know, as a journalist, and I've talked to fellow journalists who feel this way too, you feel anxious when you're not doing work in journalism. Like, I feel like I'm just sitting around. Like, if I'm not interviewing someone and producing content, I feel like I'm wasting my time.
Hmm.
And, you know, I try not to be so harsh and critical, but I do feel that sense of urgency. Like, I want to get back in the journalism scene. And, you know, now that I'm not in Ithaca, now that I'm in Albany, and I'm more well in tune with Albany news outlets, like I'm now following, you know, like campus outlets like WCDB and the Albany Student Press, as well as more Albany oriented outlets like the Albany Times Union, WAMC Radio,
Yeah.
now CivMix. And so I always view following your local news as a pillar of your connection to your community. And that doesn't stop here just because I'm a freshman. I am actually in talks with WCDB leadership, notably Mason Webster, the
Oh,
new
great.
director of the station, about launching my own podcast or my own radio program with the station that I
Excellent.
kind of envision as the next step from Youth Voices, where it's kind of a similar concept. It'll be an interview-based show, but one where I interview members of the Albany community, faculty and students alike, where it's the same concept and mission of highlighting unique stories.
Mm.
One idea that I'd love to flesh out would be moderating a discussion with a group of, say, first-generation college students, what are your backgrounds, what are your stories, what are your aspirations for the future, and really getting a feel for kind of that sector of UAlbany life. Another kind of series within the show that I'd love to flesh out would be interviewing faculty members, maybe such as yourselves, about what is your field? Like, why should someone study to be a social worker?
Mhm.
Why should someone study Jewish history? Why should someone, go into biology? Because I know as a student, that is a perspective that I would really find valuable. And it's funny because I almost view it selfishly, like I want to know these stories, and producing this show would give me an excuse to talk to people that I wouldn't talk to otherwise. And in the process, it also could serve as a great resource for the
Mm.
community. So don't worry, I definitely plan to lend my journalistic capabilities and passions as a student here at UAlbany with the station.
Great. I'm so excited to hear that. I'm also the faculty club advisor for the station. So I had to put in that little plug for the station. It's part of my duty as club advisor to help recruit promising new students to the station. So I'm pleased to hear that.
And we need to interview more freshmen. This is like pretty exciting. I was going to ask you about your goals, JT, but you pretty much summed up your goals for some of your goals, at least for UAlbany right now. That's a big list, but seeing what you already have done in high school, I think you'll be able to handle it all.
Yeah.
Thank
So-
you. I got to be honest. In high school, I wasn't the best in terms of time management. I still, my grades were good. My grades were well above passing, but still not quite what I hoped they were. I definitely chose extracurriculars over academics in high school, which to some degree I shouldn't have done. I was not, I overbooked myself. Definitely a lot of late nights. And in college, I'm proud that I've become better able at managing my time. Like I would have chosen, say, in Ithaca to cover a protest for the Ithaca Voice opposed
Mm.
to finishing a paper. And it's funny, although it did help build my repertoire as a reporter, maybe I should have taken the time to finish that one assignment. And so in college, I'm not overbooking myself. I've chosen to do, focus on academics and maybe one or two other extracurriculars outside
Yeah.
of, the radio program, which includes, leadership positions with my LLC, joining some other clubs, like I'm a member of Hillel, our
Mhm.
Jewish student organization, but I'm now able to say, I'm able to be more conservative with my time and really put my mental health and my needs first, which wasn't something high school me was good at.
Yeah, it's all about balance, and balance is not, it's not always clear at the time how to find that balance, but it seems like you're figuring that out.
Thank you. Yeah, and it's not easy. I know it took a lot of reflection about, what are my big goals? Is it having the most extensive, glamorous resume that I'm part of all these honors organizations, or is it actually doing work in radio journalism, actually interviewing people and learning stories that will help enrich my life? So for me, it's a lot about knowing yourself and what you want out of life.
Great. So what kind of advice would you give? I mentioned youth and high school students potentially listening to this. If they did, and hopefully, we can find a way to maybe advertise a little bit with that market. Um, what kind of advice would you give to youth today or high school students that might be interested in podcasts or radio or even journalism, that are kind of interested in maybe following in your path?
Well, I like to say that my general life motto is the world has no intrinsic meaning, so it's our job to come up with the meaning that's meaningful for us. And for me, that was journalism. It was learning people's stories and doing what I could to highlight that. And so, what I would say is that, you know, anyone can be a journalist. You don't have to have an expensive camera. You don't have to be a good writer. All you have to do to be a journalist, in my mind, is be a good listener and be genuinely curious about other people's stories. You guys, to me, are doing work of journalism. journalists, of interviewing people and highlighting stories. And to me, like, I feel like people can have such a narrow definition of what journalism is, and that, you have to, have your recorder ready, have to be jotting notes. That is a form of journalism, but for me, at its core, it's storytelling. Journalism is storytelling. And for me, there are so many different outlets and ways in which you can do that. My mom says that everyone nowadays has a podcast, and I think that's right. And I think it's funny because we were talking earlier about how people say that radio is dying, and I think it's fair to say that although radio is dying, everyone has a podcast.
Right.
So it's like, for better or worse, there are more things to listen to. There are more ways to get your voice heard and other voices heard. And so I would just say that, be more inquirous, try to have a natural curiosity for your world, and do whatever you can to learn more about your world. Be a more informed citizen. Not only can it help, frankly, our democracy, but it can help you as a person feel more empowered to make change.
I really like how you said that. And I think that is advice that I could have used as a freshman, because as a freshman, I was interested in journalism too. And I took Journalism 101. I went to the first class and I got so intimidated because everyone seemed to have this background that I dropped the class and I took more of my psychology and sociology. And I'm like, I'm more comfortable over there because I had a little bit more of a background. I had done a lot of my high school experiences in a school setting or working with kids and understanding, like, those mental health pieces. But I did journalism sort of on my own, but I got intimidated. So I like how you said that, is sort of just, you don't have to know everything about journalism. You don't have to be the best writer right away, but you have to have that passion and that drive and that ability to listen and want to be able to amplify other people's stories. So I think that's really important. And like I said, that's advice that I could have used as a freshman.
Yeah, 100%. I'm so happy that you said that, Alyssa. I mean, every profession, I feel like the goal of the profession and the kind of fundamental factors anyone can do. And then, if you share those fundamental concerns and passions, then you build up to it. It's like, as a social worker, not everyone instantly, knows how to talk to people about issues of mental health. Like, nobody knows how to be a skilled mental health worker or a skilled social worker until actually going through training, having job experiences, and I think having kind of a more formal education, I feel. And I think it's the same with journalism, where you just have to start out with wanting to learn, wanting to make that kind of a change, and then, like anything else, you learn how to do that. And so, and I think you're right in that, journalism can be intimidating. You may feel like you have to be the best writer, the most inquirous question asker, the most kind of professional, maybe even snooty figure. And it's like that couldn't be farther from the case. And, I know that people criticize, the internet and social media for kind of the prevalence of, kind of how easy it is to get voices that maybe shouldn't be aired out. But I think on the other hand, too, it kind of makes journalism accessible for anyone.
It does. It does. And look, I wasn't a lost cause with that. I am still writing now. It took me 20 years later, but you actually read some of my articles that I wrote. So I didn't give up on it. I actually came back and tried the journalism thing again after dropping Journalism 101 at UAlbany.
Yeah. It's really interesting, JT, hearing you talk, and it's been a fascinating conversation, very inspiring, but it also highlights to me some of the potential intersections between journalism and social work. So here on the social workers, I think you're right that Alyssa and I do sort of dabble in some quasi-journalism. We're both social workers by training, and that's our, sort of first and foremost passion, I think. But it makes me wonder, just thinking aloud here, maybe as a faculty member, if I could put that hat on for a second, if there are some opportunities for some projects, collaborative projects between journalism and social work, and maybe getting some students that are interested in both to think about potential projects that touch on both of those areas, both of those disciplines. So maybe you and I should talk further, and Alyssa can join us, to talk about that sort of potential intersection between journalism and social work.
I think that would be absolutely incredible. I love that the podcast alone, having students on, I believe students can come on the show for credit, right?
Mhm.
I think that in itself is an incredible way to get students in the realm of social work into a more kind of, as I view, a journalistic setting, like, radio and kind of a more interview based show. So I think that is one thing that's awesome. And I love that idea of connecting and branching together different fields. I know when I was producing the 2 mental health episodes, I viewed it as a journalistic endeavor. Like, I viewed it as a passion project as a reporter. But while doing so, in my mind, I was also thinking, this crosses lines. Like,
Mhm.
this transcends just journalism. This is about who we are as people. This could be used by social workers. This could be used, actually, in terms of feedback. I got an email from a local therapist saying, I'm going to share this with my patients. I'm going to share this with my coworkers. And so that was sort of a wake up thing for me. It's like, oh my God, this isn't just within my lane. This
Yeah.
permeates so many different things. And I think that there are projects to look into. I mean, even if, like, we could bring students together and choose a cause, whether it be mental illness
Yeah.
or food insecurity, or like any issue impacting our population, and do a project to raise awareness,
Yep.
that could be seen as journalistic. I think there's a lot we can do with that.
I'm hearing that you are a social worker at heart, whether you realize it or not. that there's some things in social work that speak to you, and certainly your attention to social justice and equity, and subjects that matter out there in the community, and that journalism can be a really, really fruitful avenue to explore those topics.
Yeah. And I think any type of collaboration would be great. Even today, we had interviewed two different students this morning who are social work students, who part of their assignment was to come on our radio show
Mhm.
and create their own podcast to get experience with media skills, because social workers need to be able to know how to get their message out in a clear, concise, engaging way, and how to share it with the general public. Because, we always say the public is the client. So I think any type of collaboration where social work students and journalism students and other majors can come together and realize how to use these skills that each of you have and come together to enhance their own type of toolbox, their own toolkit. So when they go out into the professional world, they have different skills. They know how to get their message out like a journalist. They know those social work skills of how to listen and about different topics and advocacy. So I think this is a really great thing. And again, I'm really excited that you're only a freshman.
And so maybe, if you're listening to this episode of The Social Workers, you can mark this down in your record books, because maybe this will be the place where, a new collaborative endeavor between these two schools has started here at the University at Albany. So we'll see what happens there. You've been listening to The Social Workers again on WCDB Albany. I'm Eric Hardiman, and I've been here with my co-host, Alyssa Lotmore, and we've been talking with JT Stone, who is a freshman here at the University at Albany, about his endeavors in podcasting and journalism. JT, it's been really wonderful having you on the show. Thanks for being our guest.
Of course. I just got to say thank you guys so much just for having me.
Of course. Yeah.
No, it's
And
been great.
if folks want to, you mentioned this earlier in the episode, but if folks want to reach out, you mentioned folks trying to find the episodes of Youth Voices, but if folks want to reach out to you, is there a way to find you? And I don't know if that's social media or email, or, if folks are listening and really want to extend some of these conversations.
Yeah, 100%. As I said, I'm active on social media. My Twitter handle is Joshua_JT_Stone. You should be able to find me there, as well as Instagram. If you're on Instagram, my Instagram handle is Joshua dot j.tstone. And as well as that, feel free to reach out to me via my UAlbany email, j, oh geez, jstone@albany.edu.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Alyssa?
Thank you so much, JT. Like I said, when I met you at that open house, the amount of excitement that you had for not only the journalism field, but just the ability to get a message out there about topics that were important, like mental health, social justice, all of these things that people want to hear about. And you have the tools and the skills to be able to get those messages out there, and your level of excitement and passion, I could tell from talking to you for 10 minutes. And I'm really excited that you are going to be entering the field, well, in 3 years, but still having this time here at UAlbany and then being able to enter the field and be able to have all of these ideas and make something happen. Get that message out there to a larger audience. I'm really, really excited.
Thank you so much. I'm just as excited. As I said earlier, if I'm not doing work in journalism, if I'm not using the platforms I have to create positive change, what am I doing?
It's a good question. Yeah. So thanks again, JT. And thank you for listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.